Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J. N. Hughes, and our show today is brought to you by the Bible Memory app, and that's BibleMemory.com. So check out BibleMemory.com, and when you get Pro, use promo code Freed Indeed. You'll get 30% off, and BibleMemory.com will give some of their profit to us so that you're helping support what we do here at Freed Indeed Ministries. Not just the show, but everything we do. So, with that said, thank you guys for joining. Today's show is going to be about worship, so-called worship music. So I'm using that term very broadly, and I'm actually not going to call it worship music for most of the show. For most of the show, what I'm going to call it is contemporary Christian music. And the reason I'm going to call it that is because I'm talking about a broad category of music. That's what's played on Christian radio stations, as well as what worship teams, and I'm putting worship in air quotes, will use as the kind of music that they play for church as well. So I've talked about on the show, and I'm sure I'll talk about this again, the fact that, first of all, the term worship is being misused here. Singing songs and even prayer are not in and of themselves worship. These things are what Orthodox Christians refer to as veneration. Um, we know that because I can, praise someone, for example, like I could praise my daughter for doing a good job, and I do this every day. Oh, I love you so much. You're such a good young woman. You're so awesome. I really love the way you do art. I really love the way you do this. You're so amazing to me. You can praise someone, and that's not worship. Nobody thinks that that's worship that I know of. There's no like Reformed Christians refusing to tell their kids that they're doing a good job because that's worship. Um, or, singing a song to someone isn't worship. How do I know? Because I can sing a song to the king, for example, like a patriotic song. I can sing a song to my wife, a love song, and none of that is worship. We know intuitively that that isn't an act of worship. So, singing songs and um, praising someone are not inherently acts of worship. So, what is worship? Well, at its heart, worship is sacrifice. So, an act of real worship is, for example, the Eucharist. The Eucharist is an act of worship. And this is why in our Orthodox liturgical services, we make a sharp distinction where when the priest is consecrating the Eucharist, he says, Thine own of thine own we offer you, for ourselves and the whole world, for all the saints, and even for Our Lady the Theotokos. So we offer these things up for or on behalf of the Theotokos, the saints, ourselves, and all the world. But we offer it to the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So he says we offer these things to the Trinity for everybody. And that's a very important distinction. So the Eucharist is something, nobody is sacrificing the Eucharist to the Virgin Mary. Nobody is sacrificing the Eucharist to the saints. Those are unique acts of worship, and we don't do that. We don't worship anyone but the Holy Trinity. So that's an important distinction that is made in the liturgy, and this is part of the reason why it's so important not to miss the liturgy. We and I'm guilty. I have been guilty of missing the liturgy from time to time. I just read a great quote though. Very convicting. Sometimes I've missed the liturgy because I'm sick or whatever, but Saint Seraphim of Zvezdinsky writes, "For the sake of the liturgy, early Christians were ready to spill their blood, to be tortured and crucified, to be burned and often killed in a catacomb church during the Eucharist." So early Christians were willing to die for the liturgy, and so many of us fail to attend the liturgy regularly. Why is that? Well, it's because we don't have the same level of devotion that they had. We need to get there. We need to cultivate that in ourselves. But part of the reason why it's so important not to miss the liturgy is because the truth is that for most of the week, we venerate God and we praise God and we glorify God, but we don't properly speaking worship God because we're not conducting the liturgy. So in our daily prayers, though our daily prayers are very important, it builds a connection with God, it builds a relationship with God, but it's not properly speaking worship. And that's a very important distinction to be made. Um, so I've made videos defending these points, and we'll talk about these things again in the future. But today I want to talk about um, basically Western music, Protestant and Catholic music, and whether it has a place in the life of the Orthodox Christian, and I believe that it does. Now, because of what I was just saying about worthiness and worship and how seriously the Orthodox Church takes worship, we do not use Western hymns for the Divine Liturgy. That's a big no-no. We only use the hymns that have been handed down to us by the saints. We only use the hymns that have been handed down to us through the ages for the purpose of the liturgy. And that's because these hymns are acts of praise and veneration that are joined together with our worship as part of the complete worship service. So our worship is not limited to these things, but our worship does include these acts of veneration. Um, just like bowing is not in and of itself an act of worship, if you bow to someone to show respect, that's not an act of worship. It's an act of veneration. However, we also sometimes bow and venerate God by bowing to Him as part of our worship of God. So an act of veneration can be brought into an act of worship, and these songs are not to be used. The songs that we're talking about today, the contemporary Christian music, they're not to be used in that way. And the reason they're not to be used in that way is because they are not inspired by God. So they contain a mix of both truth and error. Um, Sometimes they contain things uh, that are true, but they also contain things that are false. Some of them contain more truth than falsehood. But the point is that we have to practice discernment while we listen, and we shouldn't have to be practicing discernment during the Divine Liturgy. We should be receiving that which is from God during the Divine Liturgy. We should be able, with a clear conscience, to offer up to God that which God has revealed to us. So we're praying God's words back to God. That's how the liturgy needs to function. The liturgy should not be this me constantly trying to discern whether something is right or wrong. Not once I'm Orthodox. I mean, it's not wrong if I'm an inquirer, for example, to be in that state for a while, but the truth is you're not worshiping if you're doing that. And this is one of the problems that even many Protestants have acknowledged about Protestant worship services is that part of the problem is that there is no sort of authority to determine what songs are being used other than, this local congregation itself or maybe a denomination or whatever, but there's no sort of broad there's no sort of authority that has binding authority on the conscience of the individual Christian to be able to say, yes, these songs are approved, no, these songs are not, and go from there. Um, which means that the individual Protestant who is worshiping, trying to worship God, has to simultaneously be discerning whether or not this song that he is singing to God is actually theologically accurate. A great example of this is a discussion that John Piper had on his podcast many years ago now, at least 9 years ago now, maybe even 10 years ago now. I was listening to John Piper's podcast and he talked about the fact now John Piper is a proponent of using contemporary Christian music in his church service, but he was discussing the song Reckless Love or something like that. This might have even been 8 years ago now that I think about it, because I think it was not terribly long before I joined the Orthodox Church. So let me actually look up when that song Reckless Love came out and just uh because I just want to discern here. Yeah, 2017. So like 7 years ago. Um, so yeah, 7 years ago, I think this podcast I was listening to 7 years ago. Um, yeah, it's been a long time since I've listened to John Piper at all, really, but I remember them having this discussion. And in this discussion, they were talking about the song Reckless Love. You know what? I know. Yeah, okay, it was 7 years ago. Okay, so they were talking about the song Reckless Love, and John Piper makes the point that, the only part of that song that is problematic is the chorus. So uh he read the first stanza of the song aloud to his audience, and he said, I can sing this with gusto as a 5-point Calvinist and blah blah blah, and then in that context, that's how I'm interpreting this term reckless love of God or whatever. I don't care, but the point is that that's what he was saying. But he makes this point that Protestants already have to do this with other songs that are more popular. For example, um, so Charles Wesley wrote many, many, many songs um, that are very cherished by Protestants. And the thing is, though, is that Charles Wesley was very much against the doctrines of Calvinism, but Calvinists really love his songs. Um, and one of his songs that is in just about every Calvinist hymnal is the song "And Can It Be?" And can it be that I should gain? Um, but he points out, and can it be lyrics? I just want to he points this out and it was very interesting. He says now Calvinists use this hymn and it says let me see if it oh, here we go. So this is what's interesting. So He said, now you have like the third stanza, he left his father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace, emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's helpless race. 'Tis mercy all, immense and free, for oh my God, it found out me. Now, the um Calvinist can sing that part of the song with gusto because all of that fits very well into the Calvinist paradigm. And because Calvinists love that stanza so much, they ignore another part of the song. So here's the fourth stanza. Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound in sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I woke. The dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off. My heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. So John Piper points out that this verse is a much more difficult verse for the Calvinist, but they sing it anyway because verse 3 is so good to them that they're willing to ignore the fact that verse 4 has some parts that don't fit the Calvinist paradigm. I woke. I did that. Calvinists don't like that language. Calvinists are constant, oh, no, 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 it's all God, it's all God, none of it's me, there's no synergy, it's monergism. That's Calvinism's big thing, and yet their favorite song says, I woke, the dungeon flame with light, my chains fell off, my heart was free, I rose, went forth, and followed the I did. That's not Calvinism, but Calvinists sing the song. But how can the Calvinist sing, I rose, went forth, and followed thee? Especially knowing that in this context, Charles Wesley is singing as a Wesleyan. He's singing as someone who believes that he does this of his own free will, something that the modern Calvinist denies, although John Calvin himself actually believed in free will, but that's a whole other conversation. I'm not here trying, in this particular video, I'm not trying to convince you to be a Calvinist or not to be a Calvinist. My point is that John Piper himself, a noted, reformed guy, a Calvinist guy, who believes very firmly in the sort of Calvinist principles and everything, and uses modern hymns, modern, modern contemporary Christian music in his worship services, acknowledges that even classic hymns that everybody in the West is using contain things that his own tradition would actually be uncomfortable with if they stopped and thought about it. So this creates a problem though, because you're either forced to sing to God things that you don't actually believe are true, like in the song Reckless Love. John Piper is okay with singing the song Reckless Love because, well, we already do that with John Wesley or with Charles Wesley's hymns. Yeah, you do, but is that right? Should you really be singing things that contain things you don't believe? Should you really be singing hymns to God that contain things that are not true? It's a problem. Orthodoxy doesn't have that problem because our hymns are all hymns that have been approved of by the fathers, handed down through the ages, and have met with the approval of the whole church in all places, at all times, and by all. They're hymns that have the stamp of holy tradition. And because they have the stamp of holy tradition, we don't have to, once we've embraced orthodoxy, we've embraced these hymns. So we don't have to sit and 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 wonder whether or not what we're singing is true or false. In fact, I would argue that in orthodoxy, the difference is that instead of me trying to discern the rightness of the divine liturgy, I am allowing the divine liturgy to transform what my own heart believes. So if I'm, for example, a universalist who doesn't believe in hell, then on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, when we sing a hymn that says that Arius and the iconoclasts are burning with eternal conscious torment in the flames of Gehenna, where their worm shall not die and the flame shall not be quenched. I have to change my false belief in universalism to adhere to what the liturgy is saying. I don't change what the liturgy is saying to adhere to my false belief in universalism. I change my mind because God doesn't need to change his mind. So we still wrestle with things, but now we wrestle with the humility of I'm wrong, the church is right. I don't try to reform the church reforms me. And that's what worship has to be. Um, See, I said this in my video about having a real relationship with God. Having a real relationship with God means that I'm not always going to agree with everything that God is trying to show me, but I'm the one who needs to change, not God. And that's just part of wisdom, is discerning that reality. I'm the one who needs to change, not God. Um, But you can't have that as a Protestant because the problem is that as a Protestant, you don't believe that the church has inspired authority to make these declarations. So every generation we have to reinvent the wheel and refigure out what worship is supposed to look like, etc. Orthodoxy doesn't have that problem. So okay, so much for why we don't use these in worship, in the liturgy. We don't use Western hymns in the liturgy, but can we use Western hymns at all? I say yes. I say abso freaking lutely. And the reason why we can is because um I listen to Western hymns and I listen to contemporary Christian music all the time on my own time. On my own time, not during the liturgy, but on my own time, when I'm driving, when I'm at when I have my headset on, when I'm working on, when I'm writing, when I'm doing things, I have this kind of music playing because it's okay for me to be practicing that discernment in my day-to-day life. And it's okay for me to be challenging my own presuppositions. It's also okay. There's also lots of truth that is contained in these hymns. Um, and and on this score, I already do this in my day-to-day life. I really like listening to Avril Lavigne and James Blunt. Well, they're worldly people. Um they're not really necessarily Christians at all, and uh, they might be Christians in their private life, but they don't really put Christianity in most of their lyrics. I know Avril Lavigne has a song about praying, but she also has a song about dancing with the devil or whatever. Breaking Benjamin famously is a band that all of the members are church going, at least last time I checked. All of the members of Breaking Benjamin were church-going Christians. If you read the sleeve of their albums, a lot of times the members are thanking God, talking about their love of God and these things, but their songs still contain cussing. Their songs still, they don't really sing about God for the most part. They sing about other things. They sing about secular things. Um, Nickelback is a secular band. They have a song that talks about God and how everybody has some belief about what comes after, and everybody has some belief about God, even if they claim that they don't. Nickelback has a song like that, but they also have songs about beating people up and all these things. Um, we listen to secular Dax is another great example. I love listening to Dax. He has some great Christian songs actually, but he also has a lot of very secular songs, and that's okay. And there can be wisdom in a lot of these secular things as well. There can be wisdom contained in that. And there's nothing wrong with listening to metal music, rap music, whatever you like. It just doesn't belong in church. And I put Western hymns actually in that same category. I listen to Western hymns all the time. And in my main playlist, hymns are part of the rotation. Western hymns and Western and contemporary Christian music is all part of the rotation of what I'm listening to on my rotation. I also have a separate playlist on Spotify that's all just uh contemporary Christian music and hymns. So I have these things that I listen to all the time. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The issue is, are you trying to turn that into worship? Are you trying to use that to praise God? Are you trying to use that, like, are you trying to bring that into the church? Because if you're trying to bring it into the church, that's a problem for all of the reasons that I said. If you're not, have at it. Go wild. Listen to whatever you want on your own time, as long just know that you have to give an account before the Lord your God. So, there are some songs that admittedly there are some songs that get so vulgar that I don't listen to them. But for the most part, I listen to an eclectic array of music, and much of it is contemporary Christian music, because listening to those things is not the same as trying to use them as sacred music, liturgical music. Um, so I hope that this I hope that this is helpful for you guys, and please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Whatever, if you're listening to this not on YouTube, which hopefully by the time this gets published, I'll have learned how to put things out onto other platforms, then by all means, uh, subscribe or whatever you do on every platform. And the other thing is, make sure you share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed. Thank you very much. God bless.